I'm Brian V, and this is Why We Work. Today, I have the great pleasure of speaking with Val Kelly, also known as Squacky Voice, for she is the CEO and executive producer of Mid-Atlantic Voiceover LLC and the host of Live with Squacky, a podcast where she interviews people from the entertainment industry. I know she has a desire and a passion for voiceover work and acting and all sorts of things in the industry. But I also know she is a teacher. So I wonder how she balances a career with a desire to do something more. Join me today in this conversation with Val Kelly, Squacky Voice. I'm Brian V, and this is Why We Work. Today I have the great pleasure of speaking with Val Kelly. Good morning, young lady.
Good morning. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me.
Well, I know this is going to be a little difficult for you because you're usually the one asking the questions. And as you just told me, this is, a little bit of a reverse for you. So I thank you for coming and giving me the time to talk to you about work.
Of course.
Val, can you give us a little intro of yourself? And I want to bring you back. So I don't know if you've ever been brought back in time, but just a little bit about. I did a little introduction just before we started. So they have a little idea of who you are, but maybe you'd like to fill us in a little bit better.
Well, I'm a voice actor and I started out in the industry in about 1999. And back then, I really had, no idea really what I was doing. I was just starting out and taking classes and things like that. And I ended up taking one of those like intro to voiceover classes. So it was like, 6 weeks. And then they're like, "Oh, we'll produce your demo at the end." So I was like, "Oh, great. That sounds good," because I didn't know any better. And so that was kind of my first intro into the world of voiceover. And then once I finally had my demo produced, which was horrible because it was like a commercial demo after 6 weeks, I was like calling radio stations and stuff because I didn't know how to get my voice to the right people. And I remember having this conversation with somebody at a local radio station in upstate New York, and he was like, "Wow," he's like, "you have a great voice. You should totally get into animation and move to LA." And I was like, "Oh, that sounds great." And then I just kind of like, I was
Yeah,
like, How do
sure.
I do that?" you know? And so that was kind of like my first intro to it. And my demo sat on a shelf for like a good long time after that because I really didn't know what to do with it. I was sending it to like advertising agencies and, not hearing anything back because it was not to the right people. And so that was kind of like where it all started. And then in 2011, so there was a lot of time in between,
Mm-hmm.
in 2011, when after I had my second daughter, I was like, I'm not getting any younger, and this is what I really want to do with my life. And I'm also a French teacher, so
Not getting any younger. I wouldn't even have guessed you had two daughters. I thought you were much younger than that. I mean, I can go by 1999, but but that being said, having two daughters, you're doing well.
thank you. Well, I mean, it was a weird kind of. I mean, I think everyone has a kind of a strange transition into voiceover. However, they end up falling into it. They either are born into it or they
Hmm.
discover it at some point. And I was doing it in college in plays that I was in and things like that, but I just didn't realize that's what I was doing. And so when I had my second daughter, that was when I said like I want to pursue this for real. Like I want to put myself 100% into it and see if I can make this work. And so I went to a voiceover conference in Toronto and I met some great people and um I started training, and then from there I started auditioning and I ended up booking my first gig, which was a super short audiobook, which was like 7 pages or something like that. And that was the start. And from there, it just kind of took off and I just started booking stuff.
What year was just, I'll come back to it probably. What year was it you did your first audiobook? Was it still
It,
2011 or just
um,
shortly after?
oh no, I don't think it was 2011. I think it was probably 2012. It was like a
Okay.
year. I
Yeah.
auditioned for like a full year before I actually, booked stuff. And then when I booked it, I remember because I had gone to some animation coaching with like Bob Bergen in New York City, and I was like, oh my gosh, I booked this short audiobook. What do I do now? And he was like, okay, he's like, you got to get an iPad and you got to get this microphone and here's how you do it and get someone to teach you how to edit. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. I didn't expect to book it, that quickly because it was,
Yeah.
probably from the time I started in 2011 seriously in training with Edge Studio and then going to a conference. And I think the conference was probably 2012. And then, shortly after that, maybe like, within 6 months of going to that conference, I booked that first audiobook and it was for like a student. It wasn't like a huge thing,
Yeah.
7 pages and it was kind of weird. And it was like, okay. And then I just remember, 7 pages taking a ridiculous amount of time to edit. And I was like, I don't
Hmm.
know if I can do audiobooks. I don't know if I can do this. So, but then after that, I started booking other stuff like, in French and in English for little, like for e-learning and stuff like that for for
I'd like to
children's
get
apps.
into some of those things, but Val, can you bring us back? So now that we know that you have a couple children, you've been doing this for a few years, but this being why we work, what was your very first job? Since obviously it wasn't in voiceover work. What was the very first thing you did maybe as a teenager that got you out of the house to experiment or earn a dollar?
Oh, actually, I think my first job was, um, hmm, my first real job where I was
Yeah.
getting paid.
Well,
I
it
would
could be,
say,
it might not even be that. I was speaking to someone the other day. They dove for golf balls. It wasn't a real job, it's
oh
just
wow,
something they did. Another person was, w- I'm I'm pretty sure, maybe it wasn't the same person, but puppets. They had people come over for puppets. And do you know who it was? It was Roy Yokelson.
oh,
Because that's
he's
that's
the
how we
best.
met. That was the first, because I was gonna say it was him that told me that, but it was him who, he had a puppet. He was sick one day and his mom and dad bought him a puppet. And then him and his friends, there was another friend that had one, and then they would have shows and charge 10 cents a show. So,
Oh wow,
but those are the things that get people working and starting, right? So yeah,
yeah,
it may be a paid job or something else that you were doing.
yeah. My first job was at an amusement park called Jubilee Park. It was like a really small one in North Carolina, and I was the person who ran like the little kiddie rides and
Hmm.
stuff like that.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was my first ever
I
job. I
did.
don't know if it really opened any voiceover windows for me, but it was interesting at least.
Well, no, I did a couple of jobs like that too. Small amusement parks you can do. I mean, I did um, the Ferris wheel, and there's bumper cars, I think, and or even racing cars that we had, and water slides. It was all fun, sort of entertainment. It's in the entertainment industry, however you want to look at it,
Yeah, that's true.
right? You're there to entertain people. So, why did you get that job? And how old were you? I don't think you mentioned.
I think I was 19
Oh,
because
really?
I was
Yeah.
in college, and I wanted to get a job just to bring in some extra money and it's summer off of college. So yeah, and I was like, where can I work? And we were living in Wilmington, North Carolina at the time, and so my mom was like, well, why don't you apply there? And I was like, okay. So yeah.
So that's a little bit older than most people that I've experienced or interviewing in North America, 19. So was there any other things that you got out of the house to do besides going to school? I mean, and playing with friends.
Oh, well, I did like babysitting,
Yeah. Yeah.
in high school, and I was probably like 13 when I started doing that. So yeah.
So I know that you are a high school French teacher. So when did your aptitude for French develop, or was it something that someone in your family, or do you have a French background? When did that start to become important to you?
Well, in high school, all of my friends were taking French, and I was
Yeah.
taking Spanish. I started taking Spanish in like third grade, and in ninth grade, I remember being on the bus with my friends, and they were like all speaking French. They were learning. I was like, what is that? I love that. I love the way that sounds. And so that was when I first kind of
Mm-hmm.
thought, oh, I want to take French as well. So I took French and Spanish all through high school. And it turns out, which I didn't know earlier in my life, but it turns out that I knew that my dad's side of the family was from northern Italy. What
Okay.
I didn't know was that my grandfather spoke both French and Italian. And so when he lived with us for a little while when I was little, um, he spoke both French and Italian to me. So that's how I kind of developed my ear for the language and just love it. Yeah. It
That's
was
that's pretty interesting. So if you're taking both languages and obviously English as well in high school, w- when did you decide you wanted, I think you took a certificate in French studies after high school, or was that part of your high school degree? And then you went on
um
to your bachelor's and master's.
I went to my undergraduate studies were at Lenoir University, and I got my bachelor's degree in French, but I lived in France while I was in undergraduate studies in the south of France. And so I kind of did 6 months there and came back to the US and then did another 6 months in France and then came back again because I loved it so much. And
Yeah.
then I went after and got my master's degree in French. So,
That's a great experience. You're going to
yeah,
learn the language to, I mean, I'm living in South Korea and I've failed. If I was to take a test, I would be so horrible. And I've been here long enough. So I have no excuse, but I rely heavily on my dear wife. So in speaking French, learning French, taking and to the point where you're fluent, at what point did you think I want to be a teacher, or was that the path you want to take?
it actually wasn't the path that I wanted to take. When I was in college, I was getting towards my senior year, and I came back, and I was in the U.S. for my whole senior year instead of being in France. And my French professor, who was my advisor, said, "Val, what are you gonna, like what's your plan? What are you gonna do with this?" And I was like, "I don't know, speak French." And he was like, "Okay, that's not a job."
So
I
so
was
was
like,
this the real thought? Like, I have a degree, now I can speak French, and that
yeah,
was
I
his
don't know what I
part?
thought I was going to do with it. Yeah, I don't think I
Yeah.
really, like I don't think I'd never thought going into it I want to be a French teacher. That wasn't my initial thought. But then when he said like you have to make a decision, you have to either go international business or you can go education, and he's like,
Hmm.
let's get real, your math skills are not great. So international business is like off the table for you. And I was like, okay, well, I guess
I
I'm going to be a
wish
teacher then.
I wish I had an advisor like that. I don't recall ever someone at least cutting it straight, right? Like, okay, you're probably
Yeah,
not good at this, and here's the path that you might want to follow.
he was the best. Yeah, he was really looking out for me. And then what was great was that when I started doing student teaching and I got into the education program, then I ended up being really good at it. So, and I love kids, and it was just something that came naturally to me. And I quickly decided that I don't want to, teach elementary or middle school. Those were like rolled out really fast. And then high school just was like a natural thing for me. So it was really easy to make that transition. And I love it. That's why I still do both because I don't really want to give it up because I love teaching. So, yeah.
So you have been teaching for a number of years now. So, I mean, being a teacher, and even for you, knowing that you were in babysitting and you worked as an amusement park operator, like there's a path being cut out for you. Where did the voice, I mean, I know you're also known as Squacky Voice, if no one has noticed by this point. It's something for your live show. It's Live with Squacky. When did that flourish, or when did people start to notice? When did you kind of take it as your own? And was that a difficult process?
I would say it started really young, that whole squacky voice thing, because it started when I was really little. My dad and I always like played little games, like improv games I didn't know were improv at the time.
Hmm.
And that helped me to develop into, having all these characters and having all these voices. But I didn't really know at the time that was something I was going to pursue. But I always loved acting. Like in college, I took acting classes, and after college, I did some other acting, some theater and stuff like that. And I think the moment when Squacky voice really came into play was, when I really decided to say, I'm going to make voiceover a big part of my life and I want it to be something I'm able to do. And so, because my dad passed away in 2009, I wanted to kind of honor him by having the whole Squacky voice thing be a name of my show. So that's why I called it Live with Squacky, because I figured he would, be wherever he is in heaven. I figured he would feel proud of me. So that was something, got inspired from my dad.
Sorry to hear that. I also lost my mom this year and started my podcast because of work and how much she worked. So it was quite interesting. So along the way, you're saying you didn't even, take the persona of Squacky voice fully, even as your pseudonym, until 2011. I mean,
Yeah,
you did it
probably not. I mean,
2009, but you really not even before.
I think that, like I said, it was always something that was there, and I just was developing,
Yeah.
that part of my life, but I just didn't know how to fully develop it. And so once I finally figured out how to put myself 100% into it, then it really kind of started to flourish. And then I'd say probably, I don't know, 2016 or so, I think, was when I first started Live with Squacky on YouTube. And then just recently in the last year, in the last few months since the pandemic started, I took it to an audio only format, just because I got a lot of people saying, like, we love your videos, but like we just want to listen to it in the car or wherever we want
Yeah.
to. It's in a better format. So that's when I enlisted the help of Uncle Roy to help me produce it. So yeah.
So your voice is unique, you know that. And obviously you're playing off of it too. You're using it for your job, for voiceover, and you have a live show with it. Was it ever a problem where you thought you didn't like your voice? I mean, it's unique to the point it's very special. But was there a point when you were younger you're not comfortable and then you grew comfortable with it to, like, maybe people made fun of you for it? Was there any of that sort of stuff just because it is so unique?
Yeah, as a kid, I remember, and I never really got bullied for it. It was more just like, being at summer camp and winning like the cute voice award, stuff
Hmm.
like that. That was one of like the moments where you go like, oh, maybe I have something here. And I remember getting that award at my camp and just going like, oh, thanks, and just everybody always was really complimentary. No one was
Yeah.
ever really like making fun of it, or they
Yeah.
were, but it was like, I never I don't think there were very many times when I took it like in a bad way. Just thought like, this is my voice. You can take it or leave it, and just it's not going to change. So it just is what it is. And yeah, it
I
just
think it's
is who I
interesting.
am.
It's an interesting attitude that you have for people who are listening, in that if there's something about them that they find is unique, embrace it, because it is who you are and is something special. When I first heard your voice, it just honestly, it brought a huge smile to my face. I'm like, I really want to talk to this young lady. And then
Oh,
you're like,
thank you.
I mean, but it's not like I don't know. What's the definition of squacky? Like squacky to me, I don't know. What is the definition of squacky?
I think the squacky part, just because like my dad and I used to play these games where I would be like the baby duck and he would be like a fox and he'd be chasing me or whatever. And like those were our games. So like
Okay.
he would call me Squack. And so it always had something to do with ducks. And
Okay.
the thing is that it really ended up, you asked how it developed. Well, my voice gets really scratchy in the morning because I have bad allergies, like seasonal allergies. So that's where the squacky part of it came from. I just think of it as like scratchy kind of
Okay.
sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say it's more on the cute side, right? Like the squacky is like kind of a negative to me. I mean, I don't think I've ever heard the word, but scratchy, quacky or something, like a mixture of the
Yeah.
two. but it's like it's a cute sound, but not so squacky, I wouldn't say. I mean, maybe in the real early morning in the hay fever season, you might say differently. But
Yeah.
so as you're now in your career, now you have as a full-time French teacher and you're pursuing. So how do you now find your gigs, and how hard is the pursuit, one, to balance out your full-time teaching position with pursuing your long-term desires and goals to really get into some voiceover work?
I mean, I think I try to balance it pretty well. Like I have a couple of agents now, and so they send me, auditions, and I do those whenever I can. And ended up booking a couple of really big toys for Hasbro over the summer, so that was great. And so that, I mean, I would say, stuff doesn't come along as frequently as it does for people doing other genres of voiceover, but I'm also kind of particular about what I audition
Mm-hmm.
for because I really want to do the work that I want to do. I want to do things that are character based, and I really want to, I'm not saying I wouldn't do a commercial, but I don't do as much commercial work as maybe some other people do because my voice is very particular and because it's it's not something that I can easily adapt to as far as like commercials where they want the voice to not be high pitched, It's
Yeah.
just my voice is high pitched, so I can lower it a bit, but I can't make it go super low. I always sound young. So
Mm.
that kind of limits me in what I can do. But I mean, I think I try to find a good balance between the two. I mean, teaching French, obviously now we're teaching all online. So that actually has allowed me to do a bit more with my voiceover stuff. Being home all the time, I can,
Mm-hmm.
run into my studio, do a quick audition, go
Yeah.
back,
Yeah.
teach a class. And so in that respect, it's been good.
What does a day look like in when you have a gig, or you're teaching a class, you can run off, but what does it look like? What is the process? You even mentioned how difficult you didn't know it was when you first did the book, where you had to edit for that 7 pages of a student. What does the process look like for you? I guess even now with having an agent, but how hard is that process, or what does it look like?
Um, I think the process of seeking work is still very difficult. Even with agents, it's still a process of what's actually, because I don't think a lot of times agents are not only sending, they're not going like, oh, this is a perfect audition for Val. We're only going to send it to her. It's like, this
Mm-hmm.
is a perfect audition for whoever wants to audition for it. And so it's a lot less of them fine tuning and saying, we're going to send you, all of this stuff that's perfect for your voice. So it's still a process of kind of weeding through the auditions. And then, if I book something, then I just have to arrange my schedule to make it work. And in the summer, obviously, I have a lot of flexibility. So I was lucky that when I booked those things for Hasbro over the summer, that I was able to just do it whenever they needed me because I am not teaching in the summer. But otherwise, it's tricky. I have to plan my schedule around it.
Are you doing all of the editing, like, post-production work for the commercial? Are you going into their buildings, or how does that work?
Usually no. Usually if it's a toy that I'm booking, which is a lot of what I book, um, they'll have like the engineer on the call, and they'll have the toy creator or creators on the call, and then they'll be directing live, and then I record on my end, and then I send them all of the raw files, and then the engineer takes what he needs from it and does all the editing. So luckily for that, I don't have to do the editing at all. I just have to do the performance. So
Thinking about the performance, what, and you got this question many times, but the satisfaction, where is the peak satisfaction you get out of doing voiceover work, especially thinking of people, and I've seen on LinkedIn, there's lots of voiceover, there's lots of competition for you. as you were kind of alluding to, with having a manager who's like, whoever wants this, they can have it. So where does this lie with you in understanding how difficult it is, or how it would be, or the satisfaction someone would get? What brings you that satisfaction? Is it the final product? Is it just doing the work?
I mean, I love doing the work, so when I book something, it's like, I love the performance part of it. I love getting I'm actually like a very method actor. Like I get super into it, and then sometimes it's hard for me to come out of it, which is funny because when it's a toy, it's like, if I'm booking like a cat or something and I'm coming out of my studio and I'm like, meow, and my family's like, what is wrong with you? And I'm like, I'm sorry. I just spent 1 full hour like recording meows and purrs. So like, I have to come out of my character. And they're like, okay, that's weird. But now they're used to it. But yeah, I think the performance itself is really what makes me happy. And then, of course, what's really cool with toys in particular is just seeing the finished product, and going into the store and showing my kids, like, oh, this is me, like, and at first they thought it was crazy, but then, after a little bit of time and seeing how many different ones there have been, it's like, oh, that's pretty cool, Mom, that they're still using your meows for that kitty toy 7 years later, you know.
As a voiceover actor, or actually even as a French teacher, because you're a teacher and teachers don't always get the respect that maybe we deserve, as I'm a teacher as well. Either or, what would you like someone to understand about you, Val Kelly, the person, to what it is you're trying to do? I mean, you obviously have a family as well. So, and being a teacher is a full-time job, but you're also pursuing something on the side as well, which, given the work, you would probably do many hours a week if it was presented to you. What would you like people to understand about you and the work that you do, so they can have a better appreciation for the person behind the microphone or behind the desk?
Oh, I think, well, I'm just a really kind person. Like everything I do, I always am thinking of how it's going to affect other people. With my students, I'm always concerned about, are they doing well in the class? Are they understanding? Are they not being entertained? But I think, especially in this virtual format that we're in, teaching on Zoom has really been challenging
Hmm.
because I'm not used to having the restrictions of like sitting there instead of, moving around a classroom and
Yeah.
interacting in person with my students. So I think, and then I put 150% into everything I do. So I do that with my teaching, and I do it with my voiceover, and I do it with my company, Mid-Atlantic Voiceover, which is the, third component of what I do. So it's a lot to balance, but I'm always super busy, but I'm always, trying to put 100% into it.
What is the determination? What is that motivation that's getting you to put the 150% into your students and your work and your company and your family?
I
What,
I mean, I
what
just
is what
love
is
it. I love
driving what is driving you? I mean,
I've
you
always been driven. I've
yeah.
always been a very driven person, and I think it's just a desire to be successful and to pursue my dreams at, you know, and to make my family proud of me, to make my kids proud, to show them that they can do whatever they want to pursue, they can make it happen. They just have to set their mind to it.
What is a tool that you use that you couldn't do without, whether it's as a teacher or as a voiceover or even a company owner, a tool that you use that keeps you efficient? And it could
Oh
be your
gosh.
mind or your tongue or a pen or your chalkboard, or whiteboard, I guess nowadays.
It's probably my phone, actually. I don't
Is
think I
it?
could live without my phone.
Don't tell your
Yeah,
students. Don't tell your students
I know, right?
that. No phone. You don't need that. When we were
I
younger, we
know.
didn't have a phone. You could do without it for 5 minutes, and then we look at the phone.
I know. It's bad. But I'm very, very organized, and I think I would be less organized if I didn't have my phone and just my paper calendar, like, my agenda, because I write everything in there and that's how I stay organized and
Yeah.
go like, okay, this is your deadline on this and this is when you have to have this done. And yeah, it's just,
Val, thinking of my listeners, of them getting into work, maybe you as a babysitter or working in an amusement park, just starting out in your teenage years. Some of them might be starting out or changing a career. I mean, I think I noticed you were teaching at a couple of different high schools, changing, and sometimes that happens, or different voiceover work. What sort of tip do you have for people getting into work or getting into a new career?
well, I think you have to really think about what it is that your goal is before you go into something and make sure that it's going to be a job that you really think you will love doing. Because I think that if you are doing something that you don't love, it makes it a lot harder to do. And so,
Hmm.
whether it's, babysitting or teaching or voiceover, if you don't love it, it's going to just make it miserable. So, you have to decide that before you go into it. Like, really think about what are the things that you're good at. And this is something I always tell my students. It's like, oh, what do you want to be when you get out of high school? And they're like, oh, well, I think I want to do this and I think I want to do that. And I'm like, that's great. You should do whatever you want to do. But think about what you're really good at. What are you naturally really good at? I'm naturally really good at French. I naturally have a unique voice. So let me use those things to do something with my career that's going to come easily to me. So I don't have to go like, oh, this is such a hard job and blah, blah, blah. But yeah, that would be my advice is figure out what you're really good at and then take that and kind of veer your path in that direction of saying these are my possibilities of what I can do with it.
Is your school a French school, or you have the French students and French immersion per se?
It's just a public high school.
Oh,
So I teach all the French classes, yeah.
all the French classes. Is it some of them doing French immersion, or it's just a chosen elective, I guess?
It's a chosen elective, yeah.
Because I know growing up from Canada, I mean, you said you went to a conference, but maybe not. That was for voiceover work, but opposed to Spanish in America. Um, the students that took French immersion tend to do better. They tend to stay out of trouble more, or maybe just people doing two languages. I mean, they're maybe just generally wiser kids in the first place. But that's what I always felt like. Oh, those French immersion kids, they're just so bright, and they seem like they're right on the right track. So
Yeah, I
maybe,
think definitely I get the better students in French class. A lot of times, like
yeah.
a lot of them are really determined to learn the language and they really love it. So I try to make it interesting at least.
Speaking of interesting, how do you separate your work, and how do you keep your work life choices in check? I mean, you're like doing three times the work of some people, right? You have your full-time teaching job, you have your business, Mid-Atlantic Voiceover LLC, and also you're taking on voiceover work when it comes. And then you have your life and things that you enjoy. I mean, going for a walk or watching a movie. How do you keep those in check?
Um, well, sometimes I don't, honestly. Sometimes it's just a huge like, what do I have to do? How am I going to get this done? Uh, but I try to maintain some level of balance, but it's really tough. I think during the school year, I really try to focus as much as I can on my teaching French because
Hmm.
that's obviously my first priority
Hmm.
because my students are my priority and I love that job. And then, but at the same time, I have to balance it 50% with my company, Mid Atlantic Voiceover, because this year we have a conference coming up in like 3 days
Yes.
and we had to switch it to fully online. And so that's been just actually crazy, really a really crazy process. But yeah,
You have
so I
a
don't.
online. So that being said, I don't.
I don't. I really don't. There's no balance.
But at least you know it,
Right.
right? Like at least you could say, yeah, n'aime pas moi. That's
Right.
not me, right?
Right. C'est pas
Uh,
moi. I've overextended myself 100%, and at least I recognize that, and I
Well, you're
put
extending yourself at
150% into
least
it.
50% over because you're working at 150%. So you mentioned your math earlier, but what is
It's
something
not good.
but you're overextending yourself nonetheless. Thinking back, is it anything that you wish you would have known now that maybe you do impart on your students, and that's why it's a good message and it just keeps on you a lot in life, because you know if you would have known this one thing, you think something would have been a little bit different, easier, or you might not have made a mistake.
Well, I think it comes down, if I was giving advice like that, I would say it really comes down to figuring out who to trust and who not to trust.
Yeah.
I think that I've made some mistakes in my life of too easily trusting people, and then, getting burned in the end for that. So I would say that also applies to, business as well as just, personal life. But
Hmm.
that's something really important. You have to build that trust with people, and you have to be so careful now, because I think there are so many people that are not honest, and I'm a very honest person. So, and because of that and because of my kindness, I think that sometimes I've gotten walked all over. And so I think that I would try to relay that message to my students, and saying just to be careful.
This next question, I think you've actually answered it, not directly, but you're just implying it through your life. But do you put your career first, or is your character first in the work that you do?
Hmm.
So are you defined by your character, or are you defined by your career?
Gosh, that's tough, because I think my character makes up who my career is. But
Yeah.
I think, yeah, I, it's a little bit
It's
of both.
tough. It is tough, right? Like it's
Hmm.
like I am, I was explaining this to someone yesterday, and I'm like, yeah, I am this job, but if I could just retitle it and just change the title, then I'd feel a little bit better about it. Just, but what we should be doing is saying, regardless of our job, and I think this is where, some people feel bad that they're in a particular job and they're not this, what seems to be this more fluent, higher class job. But if you're in any job and if you're able to say that you do your job with the utmost integrity, that really is what's important, not the title that you have.
Right.
It's a temptation, right? And you could be one of character, but then you see someone that has a career, and then, I mean, even like you're in the entertainment business, right? How many things, how many roles do you need before you say, I've finally made it? Or what is that benchmark that makes you say, I'm fine, I'm who I wanted to be? And there's that temptation, but as long as you bring your character in, and I think you're doing that because you're saying, I'm putting it 100. I'm kind, I'm caring, and I do that with my students. I do that with my work. I do that with my company, and I do that with my family. And I think that's what you're hinting at. And a humble person's not going to say, well, yeah, I mean, a non-proud person will say, I'm pretty wonderful at what I do. And a humble person's not going to say, yeah, I always put character first. But I think it's something to think about, because the temptation is there to say who I am, look who I am, versus being humble and saying, what I do defines me rather than my career.
Right.
How do you find, I mean, you're a teacher, education plays a role in people's lives, in the sense of my listeners, because I find there's a little push where people say education's not important. But I also know that education comes in many forms. So how do you value education?
I think, I mean, obviously, being a teacher, I value it. I think that it's so important to have an education, to make sure that my children have a good education, and then also to provide education for my students. And um, I-
Well, I was thinking
sorry.
no, I was thinking a moment ago when you said about you got a French degree, but well, I could speak French. At the time, it wasn't as you thought, I can get something out of it, but you didn't know the true value in it at the time. And sometimes
Hmm.
people are in education or they're in formal education and they're taking things that they're not quite certain about, or they change them, and it's not until later you've realized the value, or sometimes people drop out completely and do something completely different. But the idea of, even if it's formal or in your work and voiceover, as you said, when you first started to learn to edit and all this sort of stuff, you went to conferences, but you needed to learn this whole thing, that it wasn't a formal education. It was grinding it out right there and then, because this is something you wanted to pursue, and that
Yeah,
education is just as valuable.
yeah, definitely. I think education in voiceover is so essential. I think that that's definitely one thing that people really need to understand, especially if they're just starting out, is that you can't really ever stop with the education. You're never like done, you know. I'm still learning new editing skills after all this time. I mean, Uncle Roy is my like I don't know what I would do without him, because he literally has saved me so many times on editing stuff, and
Hmm.
just he, produces my podcast for me and helps with the final mixing and mastering and all of that. And but in addition to that, just going to conferences and going to coaching sessions, and there's always something to learn with it. And I think that that's so important, because some people have this attitude, and I was talking about this the other day in an interview I was doing with someone for my show, and I was saying how important I thought it was, and she was like, "Yeah, because some people do have that attitude of like, oh, I've reached this level in my career, so I
Hmm.
don't need to take classes anymore." And it's like, okay, but actually, you probably should,
Hmm. Hmm.
because there's always something new to learn, and the industry is always changing.
Yeah, we mentioned Uncle Roy Yokelson a couple times. That's how I got connected with you. And he just said, many wonderful things about you and some other talented voiceover people that he's worked with. And I think he produced your demo. Is that correct?
Yeah, he did. Hmm.
It's just
He did
he
my
seems
commercial
like
demo.
he's in the know, and he's very helpful, as you mentioned. Val Kelly, is there anything else you'd like to say, especially for listeners, encouragement? Because now with 2020, there's a lot of people that lose jobs. They're not certain of their jobs. Like you, they have a passion to do something else, and maybe they need a little encouragement to get over that hump, to give it a try and not sit on their laurels. Or people who think, I don't need any education. Um, but it's just a word of encouragement for people who might be a little distraught in their work.
Of course. Well, I think you just can't give up. You have to just push through no matter what. I mean, when I when I started Mid-Atlantic Voiceover, it was literally me going, I'm going to start my own company. And my family thought it was completely nuts and like, what are you doing? It's that determination. You have to have that drive and that determination to push forward and go, I can do whatever I set my mind to doing,
Yeah.
especially now because we're living in uncertain times. And, and we hear that from everybody, but it's really true. We don't know what's going to happen.
Mhm.
And I think that you just have to do your best to stay positive no matter what. Find whatever there is positive in whatever situation. So that's really how I move through my life, going like, oh my gosh, I'm overwhelmed. What do I do? And then I go, okay, like take a deep breath, figure out what you absolutely have to do on your list, and then move through your list and get it all done. And then just, take a deep breath and move forward with a positive attitude.
Yeah, you're right. With uncertain times are uncertain in the best of times. And having that attitude, and I believe that you do have that attitude, and it's commendable.
Thank
It's
you.
is Val Kelly, where can people reach you, or how can they get in contact with you? You do have that conference coming up, I believe, as well, coming up next week
I
on the
do.
6th.
Yeah, I do. Well, they can connect with me on any of my social media platforms at Squacky Voice. So that's Instagram, Twitter, and then I'm also on Facebook and LinkedIn as Val Kelly. And then, or at mid-atlanticvo, that's my other handle, or at Live with Squacky for my podcast. And the Mid-Atlantic Voiceover Conference Mini Mavo 2020 is coming up this week in like
Mhm.
3 days. Deep breath. And yeah, it's
This is
coming
an
up.
online voiceover conference, correct?
Yeah,
From the
yeah.
6th to
So
the 8th.
right. So we have pre-conference. We have one pre-conference session on the 5th at night, and then a pre-conference happy hour on the 5th at night as well after that. And then the main event starts on the 6th, and it's the 6th, 7th, and 8th. So it's 3 full days of jam-packed sessions that are interactive. And I worked really hard to make sure that the sessions will be interactive and fun, even though they're online. And that it's not the same as in person, but I think it's going to be great. We have some great guest speakers lined up, like Eric Bauza and Mark Scott and Uncle Roy and just J. Michael Collins and so many people. So it's going to be really great. I'm excited and I'm nervous for it, but it should be good.
I'm sure you're a teacher, so I'm sure you're well prepped.
Yes.
You are ready to go, and I'm sure you will do just great. I was listening to someone today about fear and just using that fear, uh, nervousness as just that fire. I mean, what was it? Fire can be damaging, or we can use it for cooking. But in the same sense, it's fear, right? We use that fear. We could be afraid, or we can use it to drive us to do what we want to do. And your passion is in voiceover work, and I'm sure this will go off without a hitch. Val
Thank
Kelly,
you.
I have one more question for you, and that is, why do you work?
Why do I work? Because I love it. Because I love
Good
it.
enough answer for me.
Yeah.
Perfect. Val Kelly, I thank you for the time, and enjoy the rest of your day. And I hope the most success on this up and coming conference that is only a few days away, and all of your other work, even as a teacher and as a mom.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.